Cool. So to introduce myself, I'm Josh, founder, CEO of Irys, and I'm going to be talking about how Irys is building the AWS of Web3. So what is Irys? So Irys is a high-performance data chain, so layer one, and the idea behind Irys is at its core, it enables anyone, and specifically developers, to store large amounts of data on chain. So traditional blockchains could only store very small amounts of data. Think, gigabytes would cost millions of dollars on Ethereum and Solana. And the goal behind Irys, you can store large amounts of data, think exabytes or more, for a fraction of the cost, and cheaper than traditional storage providers, and also cheaper than Ethereum, Solana, etc. And the core unlock for us is, yes, we are focused on storing large amounts of data, but we're also focused on this idea of building utilities, which is that you don't just store large amounts of data, you actually make use of that data, and you are able to monetize that, and you're able to compute on that data. And the goal for Irys is how can we actually not just build a data network, but also build a network where you can tap into these kind of broad set, hundreds of utilities on the chain. So this is kind of talking about the virtuous loop between the utilities and the value of the data. So the analogy I use is people don't use S3, AWS S3, because S3 is an incredible product. They use S3 because it's part of this very broad set of services that live on the chain. So if you're a developer, you know there's S3, there's EC2, which is compute, there's RDS, which is a database, and all of these things work together in a very kind of composable and seamless way. And that's where AWS's moat functionally comes from. It doesn't come from the fact that each one of those products are good, which is true. It comes from the fact that it all work together very seamlessly. And mapping this to Irys, the goal is that as we add more and more utilities to Irys, the value of the data that you're storing increases over time. So at the beginning, developers are using Irys because they want to store large amounts of data on chain. And then over time, that changes to, well, now when you store your data on Irys, you can monetize your data, you can compute on your data, et cetera, et cetera. So that's kind of the high level of kind of the vision for Irys. So to talk more about like a tangible example and something that we're actually seeing within our ecosystem. So as I said, the core service is that you can store large amounts of data on chain, and it is both cheaper than traditional blockchains and also cheaper than traditional storage providers like S3 and other forms of blob storage. But to give an example of this set of utilities on the chain and how the composability works, you can have, and we actually have a team within our ecosystem, for example, that is building a on-chain database where you can store large amounts of data on Irys, but also bring that data into a structured database. And then we have another team that is focused on building a data marketplace, with one of the customers being Stability AI, actually. And the goal there is that, OK, now users and developers can store large amounts of data on Irys at a fraction of the cost. They can inject that and bring that into a very structured database, a structured data set, which makes the data more useful. And then you can monetize that structured data natively within Irys as well. So you create this level of composability where, one, they're getting benefits from the core service that is storing data, and then they're also able to use that data within an on-chain database, and also monetize that data and actually accrue extra revenue, have an extra revenue source from another application that lives within the ecosystem. So the way this kind of works is that Irys is an L1, right? And there are two services there are two main functions of Irys. One is to store data, as I've said a few times. The other is actually to coordinate a lot of these resources and a lot of these utilities that exist on the chain. So at its core, Irys is customer one, where it enables you to store large amounts of data. But also, we have tons of applications, tons of different kind of utilities on the chain that enable you to do different things with your data. So as I said, we have a team focused on selling your data. We have a team that's focused on using that data in a more structured way within a database. And then we also have another example is we have a team building edge compute. So tapping into the GPUs on the network, how can you actually train a whole AI model on the data that you're storing on Irys. And the way that it works is we essentially integrate both storage and execution on the same chain, meaning you can, again, store large amounts of data on chain, but also have a verifiable execution layer on the chain. So you can have tokens, you can have utilities, and you can also bring the data that you're storing into smart contracts as well. So why do people actually build on Irys? And it does vary. So we see kind of two sets of applications on Irys. We have applications that simply want to store large amounts of data on Irys and also retrieve that data. So we see those kind of applications across different ecosystems, right? So we work with teams in the world of DeSci, on Ethereum. We work with NFT ecosystems on Solana and Eclipse and other chains, some social apps on Benaron. And then we also do a lot of work around archiving chains and also a bunch of like different training infrastructure as well, with decentralized training infrastructure on different chains. So that's kind of one set of use cases where people are simply just wanting to store large amounts of data on chain for a fraction of the cost. And then the second reason that people actually use Irys is that you get to tap into the data that exists on the chain. So when you're thinking about why would you build one of these utilities on Irys opposed to on another chain, the answer is pretty simple. Because there is so much data on Irys, there's kind of this idea of, to use investors' terms, like deal flow, this distribution, where you can just, by deploying an Irys, you can already tap into, one, the data that exists on the chain, but two, the utilities that already exist. So to use I'll stick with a database example to keep or even I'll use the monetization actually example to be a little bit more consistent. The reason they would deploy it on something like Irys is that one, there's a bunch of like data sets that exist in Irys that they can go and sell to Stability AI, etc. But then there is also a bunch of like utilities. Think about the database where they can tap into these like different services that kind of coexist with their application on chain that they can drive more value from, and that's more of a distribution play. By being on the same chain, they can tap into that kind of composability that occurs by being on that chain. So, keeping this one short. So, in terms of what you can do today, so some builders, you can go and build data applications. You can start storing data, retrieving large amounts of data. There are no limits. It's very cheap. You can store data in both a temporary and a permanent way. And then for people interested in building data utilities, you can already deploy on our alpha testnet. So you can already deploy smart contracts. You can do programmable data, which is the idea of bringing data into smart contracts already. And all of this is documented within our docs, which is docs.irys.xyz. But yeah, feel free to ask me any questions afterwards if you have any.